always thought family reunions were supposed to be warm, nostalgia-filled gatherings with laughter and shared memories. I had never experienced one like that, but television had led me to believe they existed somewhere in America. What I did not expect was for my first family reunion in 15 years to take place in a dimly lit law office with the smell of old leather and even older grudges permeating the air. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, though everyone has called me Ellie since childhood. At 32, I had built a life carefully distanced from my family name and the whispered scandals that followed it. I had a modest but successful career as a historical restoration specialist in Portland, Oregon, about as far from my family's estate in Connecticut as I could reasonably get while remaining on the same continent. Until 3 weeks ago, when a thick cream envelope bearing the family crest arrived at my apartment. Inside was a formal notice informing me that my grandmother, the formidable Agatha Rose Mitchell, had passed away at the age of 93. The same grandmother who had publicly disowned my mother 30 years ago, and by extension me, the same grandmother who had declared to anyone who would listen that neither of us would see a penny of the Mitchell fortune. Yet there I was, summoned to the reading of her will. "Ms. Mitchell, we're ready to begin," said Mr. Phillips, my grandmother's attorney, his voice pulling me back to the present moment. I lifted my gaze from the ornate carpet to survey the room. Across from me sat my cousin Victor, looking exactly as insufferable as he had at 17, just with better tailoring and a receding hairline. Beside him was his mother, my Aunt Judith, her face a frozen mask of Botox and disdain. 3 chairs down was my Uncle Edward, my father's older brother, who had taken control of the family business after my father's death. His wife Marianne sat primly at his side, her gaze fixed firmly on the grandfather clock, as though counting the minutes until she could escape. The only person missing was my mother, Caroline. She had refused to come, stating that she had made peace with her disinheritance decades ago and had no interest in watching vultures pick over the carcass of her childhood. I could not blame her. She had built an authentic life after being cut off, remarrying a kind professor and dedicating herself to teaching underprivileged children. She did not need or want Agatha's money. I was not so noble. I had come partly out of curiosity and partly because my business was struggling. Historical restoration was my passion, but it did not always pay the bills, especially with a significant loan still outstanding from my graduate studies. Even a small inheritance would make a difference in my life. Though I harbored no illusions, I was surely there as a formality, nothing more. "Before I begin," Mr. Phillips said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "Mrs. Mitchell left explicit instructions that this recording should be played first." He pressed a button on a sleek digital recorder in the center of the table. After a moment of static, my grandmother's voice, crisp and commanding despite her age, filled the room. "If you are hearing this, I am dead. Do not bother with false sentiments or crocodile tears. We all know what brings you here today." I could not help the small smile that tugged at my lips. Grandmother had never been one to mince words. "My life has afforded me the luxury of time. Time to watch each of you, to assess your characters, your choices, your true natures. What I have observed has largely disappointed me." Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Aunt Judith's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her handbag. The Mitchell fortune was built on ingenuity, perseverance, and vision, qualities I have found woefully lacking in most of my descendants. However, I have no intention of allowing my life's work and my family's legacy to be squandered by those who have not earned it. Uncle Edward leaned forward, his expression darkening. I kept my face carefully neutral, though my heart had begun to race. "Therefore, I have devised what I believe to be a fitting method of determining who among you deserves to be my true heir. Consider it my final gift to the Mitchell name, a chance to restore the qualities that made our family great." Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. "The recording continues with specific instructions that align with the documents I am about to share with you." He distributed thick manila envelopes to each of us. Inside mine was a bound document titled, "The Mitchell Inheritance Terms and Conditions." I flipped it open as my grandmother's voice continued from the recorder. "Inside these packets, you will find the details of what I call the inheritance game. The full Mitchell estate, the main house, the summer property, my personal assets and controlling interest in Mitchell Industries, valued at approximately $173 million, will be awarded to the winner. A collective intake of breath filled the room. I nearly dropped the document in shock. $173 million? That was far more than even the family rumors had suggested. Participation is, of course, voluntary, the recording continued. Those who do not wish to participate will receive a one-time payment of $100,000, a respectable sum, but a fraction of what awaits the winner. You have 24 hours to decide. Mr. Phillips turned off the recording. Mrs. Mitchell has left me as the executor and officiator of this competition. The basic framework is outlined in your packets, but I can answer preliminary questions now. This cannot be legal, Uncle Edward said immediately, his face flushed with anger. The company should pass directly to me as the current CEO and her eldest living son. I assure you, Mr. Mitchell, everything has been vetted by 3 separate legal teams, Mr. Phillips replied calmly. Your mother was quite thorough in ensuring this would withstand any challenges. Victor was frantically flipping through his packet. What exactly is this game? What do we have to do? Mr. Phillips folded his hands on the table. Mrs. Mitchell has designed a series of challenges based on the core values she believed made the Mitchell family successful. Skills, knowledge, judgment, and character will all be tested. The competition will last 6 months, after which a winner will be declared according to the point system detailed in Section 3. I finally found my voice. And if someone chooses not to participate? As Mrs. Mitchell stated, you'll receive $100,000, sign a waiver of any further claims on the estate, and be free to leave. $100,000 was not insignificant. It would clear my business debt and give me some breathing room. But compared to what was at stake, I returned my attention to the document, scanning the overview. The challenges would be varied: business acumen, historical knowledge of the family and its enterprises, physical endurance, strategic thinking, ethical decision-making, and something cryptically labeled restoration of legacy. Participants would be required to live on the Mitchell estate for the duration of the competition, with limited outside contact. It was absurd. It was manipulative. It was exactly the kind of grand, controlling gesture my grandmother would devise from beyond the grave. I assume you all need time to consider, Mr. Phillips said, standing. Please inform me of your decisions by this time tomorrow. The competition begins in 1 week. I spent that night in the Mitchell townhouse, a property I had not entered since I was 15 years old. My old room had been preserved like a museum exhibit, frozen in time with the posters and trinkets of my teenage self still in place. It was unsettling, this evidence that I had been remembered despite being excluded. I called my mother from the window seat that overlooked the garden where I had once played as a child. It's a manipulation, Ellie, she said after I explained the situation. Mother could never relinquish control, not even in death. She's orchestrating one last power play. I know, I sighed. But $173 million, Mom. I could do so much good with that kind of money. You could also lose 6 months of your life jumping through her hoops only to walk away with nothing, she countered. Take the $100,000 and come home. It's clean money with no strings. She was right, of course. The sensible choice was to take the guaranteed sum and return to my life. Yet something kept me turning the pages of the inheritance document long after we had ended the call. Perhaps it was the section on restoration of legacy that intrigued me most. My professional life was dedicated to restoring historical properties, preserving their stories while making them functional for the modern world. I understood restoration in a way the others could not. Was that coincidence? Or had my grandmother been watching me more closely than I had realized? By morning, my decision was made. I would play the game. 1 week later, I moved into the Mitchell estate along with Victor, Aunt Judith, and Uncle Edward. Marianne had opted out, taking the $100,000 and returning to their Manhattan apartment with evident relief. The 4 of us would compete for a fortune that could change not just our lives, but the trajectories of future generations. The first challenge arrived at breakfast on our first full day, delivered by Mr. Phillips, who would be staying in the guest house to oversee the competition. Your initial task is straightforward, he announced, distributing sealed envelopes. Mrs. Mitchell believed that understanding history is crucial to building the future. Each of you has been assigned a different aspect of Mitchell family history to research and present. You have 3 days. I opened my envelope, half expecting to find some obscure branch of the family tree I would struggle to document. Instead, I found a single card with elegant script. The disinheritance of Caroline Mitchell, causes, consequences, and truths unspoken. My hands began to tremble. Of course, grandmother would not make this easy for me. She was forcing me to confront the very event that had severed my branch from the family tree. I looked up to find Victor smirking at me from across the table. He had clearly received a less provocative assignment. Uncle Edward was frowning at his card, while Aunt Judith's face had drained of color. The Mitchell Library and Archives are at your disposal, Mr. Phillips continued. Mrs. Mitchell has left specific evaluative criteria for each presentation. I spent that day in the family library, a magnificent 2-story room lined with books collected over generations. The Mitchell family archives were meticulously organized: journals, correspondence, financial records, and photographs dating back to the 1850s when my great-great-grandfather had founded the shipping company that eventually evolved into Mitchell Industries. Finding information about my mother's disinheritance was surprisingly difficult. The official family records contained only the bare minimum: dates, the formal declaration of disinheritance, and amended estate planning documents. The real story, the human story, had been sanitized from the archives. I would need to dig deeper. That evening, I slipped into my grandmother's study. The room had been left untouched since her death, her presence still palpable in the arrangement of objects on her massive mahogany desk, the half-empty crystal decanter of bourbon, the reading glasses folded neatly beside an open book. I did not know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew my grandmother. She would have kept records of everything, especially something as momentous as cutting off her only daughter. The question was where. After an hour of careful searching, I found it, a false bottom in the desk's central drawer, concealing a leather-bound journal with my mother's name embossed on its cover. My heart pounding, I removed it and retreated to my room. The journal contained my grandmother's private thoughts about my mother spanning decades. The early entries were filled with pride and affection, detailed observations of my mother's intelligence and determination. But as the years progressed, tension emerged, my mother questioning family traditions, challenging business practices she deemed unethical, pushing for modernization that my grandmother resisted. The final break came when my mother fell in love with my father, David Harrison, a brilliant environmental lawyer who had actually sued Mitchell Industries over a chemical spill in a local watershed. My grandmother had demanded my mother choose between her family and the man she loved. My mother chose love. What surprised me most were the later entries, written years after the disinheritance. Reflections that revealed doubt, even regret. One passage in particular caught my attention. Watched Caroline's speech at the Education Summit from the back row. She did not see me. Her program for underprivileged children has transformed 3 failing schools. The Mitchell's stubbornness serves her well, though she uses it against tradition rather than to uphold it. Perhaps that is its own kind of legacy. There was another entry from the year I graduated college. Eleanor received top honors in architectural preservation. Caroline has raised a daughter with the Mitchell eye for history and beauty, despite my absence. I sent an anonymous donation to her first restoration project in Portland. It seems aptly symbolic. The girl restores historical structures while the Mitchell name crumbles, without proper heirs to maintain it. My grandmother had been following my career, had contributed to my first project. I sat back, stunned by the realization that the woman who had banished us had never truly let us go. By dawn, I had constructed a presentation that told the true story, not just the facts of the disinheritance, but the human complexity behind it. The pride and disappointment, the clash of values, the stubborn principles on both sides that made reconciliation impossible. 3 days later, we gathered in the formal dining room to deliver our presentations. Victor spoke about the company's expansion into international markets in the 1980s. Uncle Edward covered the family's political connections during the post-war boom. Aunt Judith, looking distinctly uncomfortable, detailed the circumstances surrounding my grandfather's death and the rumors of infidelity that had plagued his final years. When my turn came, I placed my mother's journal on the table. My assignment was to research the disinheritance of Caroline Mitchell, I began. What I discovered was not just a family rift, but a story about the price of principles and the nature of legacy itself. I proceeded to share what I had learned, including passages from the journal that revealed my grandmother's private thoughts. As I spoke, I watched the others' reactions. Uncle Edward's surprise, Victor's growing discomfort, Aunt Judith's tears. The conventional narrative is that my mother abandoned her heritage for love, I concluded. The truth is more complex. She upheld Mitchell values of conviction and integrity, but applied them differently than her mother expected. Their conflict wasn't about rejection of family, it was about different visions of what the Mitchell legacy should be. When I finished, silence filled the room. Mr. Phillips made notes on his tablet, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell," he said finally. "That concludes our first challenge. Results will be tabulated according to Mrs. Mitchell's criteria and announced tomorrow." That night, Uncle Edward knocked on my door. "That was quite a presentation," he said, his tone carefully neutral. I had no idea Mother kept such detailed records of her thoughts. "Neither did I admitted. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you mind if I look at the journal? There might be insights about the business that could be valuable." I studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. Was this genuine interest or strategic maneuvering? "I'll bring it to breakfast tomorrow," I said. "We can all review it together." He nodded, though I could see he was disappointed not to get private access. "Fair enough. Good night, Eleanor." The next morning, Mr. Phillips announced the challenge results. In fourth place, Victor Mitchell. Victor's face flushed with anger. In third place, Edward Mitchell. In second place, Judith Mitchell. He turned to me. And in first place, with the highest score Mrs. Mitchell's rubric allowed, Eleanor Mitchell. I had won the first challenge. The game had barely begun, and already the dynamics were shifting. Over the following weeks, the challenges varied wildly. One day we were asked to analyze a struggling division of Mitchell Industries and present turnaround strategies. Another day we were sent on a scavenger hunt across the estate, deciphering clues that related to family history. We participated in a charity auction, where our success was measured not by how much we raised, but by how effectively we matched donors to causes they would genuinely care about. Through it all, I found myself learning more about my family's history, both the achievements and the darker chapters that had been glossed over in official accounts. I discovered that Victor had a surprising talent for creative problem-solving when pressured. I learned that Uncle Edward's business acumen was genuine, though his interpersonal skills were lacking. And I realized that Aunt Judith harbored deep insecurities beneath her polished exterior. 3 months into the competition, I was leading in points, followed closely by Uncle Edward. Victor had fallen to a distant third, and Aunt Judith had withdrawn entirely after a particularly difficult physical challenge aggravated her old back injury. She took her 100,000 and left with as much dignity as she could muster. That left 3 of us to face the legacy challenge, the cryptic final test that would carry the most weight in determining the ultimate winner. Mr. Phillips gathered us in the library one rainy afternoon. Mrs. Mitchell left specific instructions that this challenge would be revealed exactly 3 months into the competition, regardless of how many previous challenges had been completed. He handed each of us identical wooden boxes, intricately carved with the Mitchell family crest. Inside mine was a single key and a letter in my grandmother's handwriting. "Eleanor, if you are reading this, you have demonstrated qualities that suggest you may be worthy of the Mitchell legacy. This final challenge is different from the others. It is not a test of knowledge or skill, but of vision and character." The key enclosed opens the North Tower room, which has remained sealed for 30 years. What you find there will present you with a choice. That choice will determine whether you truly understand what legacy means. Choose wisely. Agatha Rose Mitchell. I glanced at Victor and Uncle Edward, who were reading similar letters. The North Tower had been strictly off-limits throughout my childhood. Its existence acknowledged, but its purpose never explained. You have until sunset tomorrow to complete this challenge, Mr. Phillips said. You may proceed individually or collectively as you choose. Uncle Edward immediately pocketed his key and letter, nodding curtly before leaving the room. Victor lingered, eyeing me speculatively. Want to join forces, cousin? He asked with a smile that did not reach his eyes. 2 heads and all that. I think I'll explore on my own first, I replied carefully. But thank you for the offer. He shrugged. Suit yourself. May the best Mitchell win. Once alone, I examined the key more closely. It was old and heavy, made of tarnished brass with an ornate handle. Whatever it unlocked had not been accessed in many years. I made my way through the east wing of the mansion, up the spiral staircase that led to the north tower. The door at the top was solid oak, reinforced with iron bands. More secure than seemed necessary for a simple storage room. The key turned with difficulty, the lock's mechanism protesting after decades of disuse. The door swung open with a haunting creak, revealing a circular room with windows on all sides, offering a panoramic view of the Mitchell estate and the town beyond. But it was not the view that captured my attention. It was the contents of the room. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents. A comprehensive visual history of the damage caused by Mitchell Industries over the decades. Chemical spills that had poisoned groundwater. Labor disputes that had torn communities apart. Tax evasion schemes that had deprived local governments of resources for schools and infrastructure. In the center of the room stood a podium holding a massive leather-bound ledger. Its pages contained 2 columns, profit and cost. The profit entries listed dollars and cents, with meticulous precision. The cost entries enumerated environmental damage, worker injuries, community impacts, the human price of the Mitchell fortune. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. The final entry, dated just weeks before my grandmother's death, was different from the rest. Instead of columns, it contained a single sentence. The true cost can never be repaid, but the cycle can be broken. Beside the ledger was a smaller book titled Restoration. Its pages were blank except for the first, which contained instructions. The winner of the inheritance game will have complete control of the Mitchell fortune and legacy. This room represents the choice before you. Continue the cycle of profit above all, or restore what has been broken. Your specific plan of restoration must be recorded in this book before you leave this room. Choose with the understanding that your decision is irrevocable. I sank into the chair beside the podium, overwhelmed by the implications. The Mitchell fortune had been built on exploitation and environmental destruction. The very things my father had fought against, the very reason my mother had been cast out. Was this the true purpose of the inheritance game? Not to find the most business-savvy heir, but the one who would recognize the moral debt and have the courage to repay it? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly gathered my thoughts. Moments later, Uncle Edward appeared in the doorway, his face ashen as he surveyed the room's contents. You've seen it, I said quietly. He nodded, approaching the ledger with reluctance. Your father was right all along. That lawsuit, it barely scratched the surface. Did you know about all of this? He ran a hand through his silver hair. Pieces. Rumors. Nothing this comprehensive. He looked at me with tired eyes. Your mother knew. That's why she left, isn't it? Not just because of your father, but because she could not stomach being part of this. Before I could respond, Victor burst into the room, out of breath from running up the stairs. His eyes widened as he took in the display. What the hell is this? He demanded. The true Mitchell legacy, I replied, gesturing to the walls. And our final challenge. Victor scanned the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to calculation. This changes nothing. Business involves tough decisions. Every major fortune has skeletons. These are not skeletons, Victor, Uncle Edward said sharply. These are people, communities, ecosystems. So we'll throw some money at environmental charities, Victor shrugged. Set up a foundation with a fraction of the interest. Problem solved, conscience clear. I turned to the blank restoration book. I do not think that's what grandmother had in mind. Oh please, Victor scoffed. This is just another test. To see if we have the stomach for the realities of wealth and power. The winner will be whoever proposes the most practical solution that protects the core business. He might be right. This could be a test of business pragmatism, seeing which of us could acknowledge the past while moving forward profitably. But something about the room, about the meticulous documentation of consequences, suggested otherwise. Uncle Edward and Victor began arguing about interpretation and strategy, but their voices faded into background noise as I contemplated my grandmother's true intentions. I thought about my mother, who had chosen principles over fortune, about my father, who had dedicated his life to holding corporations accountable, about my own work restoring historical structures, preserving what was beautiful and valuable, while repairing what was damaged and making it functional for a new era. I picked up a pen and began to write in the restoration book. 1 month later, I stood on the steps of the newly established Mitchell Restoration Foundation, addressing a crowd of journalists, community leaders, and former employees of Mitchell Industries. The Mitchell family's wealth came at a cost borne by many of you, I said, looking directly at the faces before me. Today, we begin the process of restoration, not through token gestures or public relations campaigns, but through substantive action and structural change. The plan I had outlined in the tower room, the plan that had won me the inheritance game, was already in motion. Mitchell Industries was being transformed into a worker-owned cooperative. The estate itself was being converted into a center for environmental research and education. The bulk of the fortune was being directed to specific restoration projects in communities that had suffered the most damage. Uncle Edward stood beside me, having chosen to lend his business expertise to the transition rather than contest the results. Victor had disappeared after the announcement, taking his consolation payment and, according to rumors, heading for the Cayman Islands. My mother had finally returned to the estate for the first time in 30 years. She stood in the back row, her eyes bright with unshed tears, as she watched me fulfill a vision of the Mitchell legacy that aligned with her own principles. Principles that had cost her so much. After the ceremony, Mr. Phillips approached me with a final envelope. Mrs. Mitchell asked that this be delivered to the winner after the foundation announcement. Alone in what had been my grandmother's study, now my office, I opened the envelope and found a short note. Eleanor, if you are reading this, you chose restoration over continuation. You recognize that true legacy is not measured in dollars or buildings, but in impact and integrity. Your mother made the same choice 30 years ago, though in a different form. She chose integrity over fortune. I was too stubborn to recognize the wisdom in her choice, until it was too late for reconciliation. Some debts can never be fully repaid. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. But perhaps through you, both the Mitchell fortune and the Mitchell name can finally serve a purpose worthy of remembrance. The tower room is both confession and challenge. You have accepted that challenge in a way that would make your parents proud. In doing so, you have proven yourself the true heir to the legacy I should have built. Agatha Rose Mitchell. I set down the letter, gazing out the window at the estate grounds where workers were already beginning renovations for the research center. The Mitchell name would indeed be remembered, though not in the way my ancestors had envisioned. Not as a symbol of wealth and power, but as an example of accountability and transformation. Some might call it the end of an empire. I preferred to think of it as the beginning of redemption, a different kind of inheritance altogether.